Good day to you all. This is the second lecture where I will turn corporate governance upside down. I did the first lecture presenting corporate governance in an ordinary way. Now I will make it the other way around. So I will try to turn on the slides that I've sent you, and it's available on internet. So this is the corporate governance and governance of owners, the second lecture. My name is Sven-Olof. I'm a professor of corporate governance, Free University of Scania, and also affiliated professor at Kharkiv University of Humanities, the Ukrainian Academy. And as a Swede, I have this symbol showing the solidarity Sweden have with Ukraine these awful days. So, to turn corporate governance upside down, that means, this is the lecture 2, that means that instead of doing the ordinary thing to have the corporate governance mechanisms that then influence the corporate management, the chief executive officer and the top management team, but also the other parts of the organization, we now do the opposite way. We ask, why not think about the other way around? That the CEO, top management team, they try to influence the corporate governance mechanism. And that is what this lecture will be focusing on. Because corporate governance are those processes and structures that discipline the corporation, especially the CEO, the corporate executive officer, and the top management team of the corporation. If we see corporate governance from the point of view of the CEO and the top management team, we see that corporate governance mechanisms are factors in their environment that they have to deal with as part of the duty to perform their assignment, corporate management. Normally, corporate management focuses on how to develop, maybe in cooperation with the board and the main owners, the corporate strategy, and even more, how to implement the strategy. In this development and implementation, they have to consider the environment, how it influenced the organization and the implementation process, and how it can be used in order to make the implementation successful. Part of this environment are the governance structures and processes. Thus, even if it appears strange, the governance structures and processes are or should be considered in corporate management. To this adds the fact or assumption that the corporate managers are individuals with their own capacity to think and to act, which is termed opportunists. They are not simply simple servants with only one capacity and interest, to obey. Being selected to the very top of the organization, they are strong acting individuals. They have capacity to cooperate with the owners and the board of directors and other important stakeholders, but they can also neglect governance influences or even create resistance. They have themselves individual objectives, but since they are managers, they also have organizational objectives. If you look at the slide here, corporate management is defined by how to manage the organization in order to implement the strategy of the organization. That includes managing resources, dealing with finance, coordination of activities, control of activities, communication, internal, external, performance oversight to make sure that everyone is performing, recruitment, socialization, training, and organizational development. And sometimes it also includes development of strategy. It depends on the organization and the size. But they have to create conditions for successful development and implementation of the strategy. And that is to influence the very conditions. And one of these conditions are the corporate governance mechanisms. So I would say that one duty of corporate management is to influence the corporate governance mechanism in order to be able to successfully implement the strategy. Now, an individual can be said to have at least 3 dimensions that are of interest in governance. That these are what we could say assumptions of corporate managers. We assume that individuals are effort avoiding. While it appears as if people are trying to not engage, but to be lazy, it could also imply an effort to get around governance pressure that the individual do not believe in and think is a bad idea. So the first assumption normally in economics that people are effort avoiding. I wonder if that is really correct, especially when it deals with top managers, because they have been selected to be not effort avoiding, but to seek effort. Second, we assume that individuals try to gain wealth, material wealth, social wealth, or security. For corporate governance is in a prestigious, powerful position and have therefore opportunities to gain wealth from the corporation, that is from wage negotiations and through incentive schemes. But we also have to consider the other kinds of wealth that is not directly material, but could have material consequences. Managers care about social wealth, such as status, and security, and that is to have a secure position and a stable income. Thirdly, we assume that individuals enjoy discretion, that is to have capacity and opportunity to act without constraints. But corporate governance are mainly constraints, which means that managers try to defend itself from the influence of the governance that reduce the manager's discretion. In a way, it is not the full intent of the governance mechanism to reduce the discretion of managers, as I told you in the first lecture. On the contrary, governance implies to create situation of opportunities of corporate development. Therefore, governance do not imply to recruit obedient individuals, but those with high capacity to act and to be capable, which tend to imply independent individuals. Then we could also maybe add a fourth assumption: act out of duty. And if so, duty towards what or who? One could think that managers, especially those that reach the top level, they have a conception of what is a corporation. What should a corporation be? That means that they have some kind of ideology, a norm of what is a corporation. So therefore, I also think that we could add a fourth assumption, that managers, especially top managers, have a sense of duty, not a duty towards the owners, maybe, not a duty towards the board. All of these are constraints that one have to consider when implementing their ideal of a good corporation. So now we will talk through the governance mechanism and consider them from the perspective of the manager and how they can be managed by the managers in order to be a positive force for the corporate managers in their corporate management, to promote themselves and to promote the corporation, and ultimately to promote the implementation of the strategy. So it will be about corporate management, where the management is directed towards managing the governance. First, we start with how to manage corporate capital, and in corporate capital is the ownership. Capital consists of equity, debt, and free cash flow, as I told you in the first lecture. And equity, that is what is represented by the shareholder capital. Of these three, equity is the most important capital because behind equity hides those that are called the owners of the corporation. That is the shareholders of the corporation, which are those that are termed principals. It is assumed in theories such as agency theory and property right theory that the corporation is not only led by them, but also created by them. The corporation has therefore to fulfill the interest of the shareholder. This means that the corporate management should be guided by a shareholder orientation. Equity capital is a powerful party since equity representatives vote on the shareholder meeting and elect the board of directors, in which much of the governance power is residing. However, equity is the main residual capital. That is the party that gets what is left when all the other parties of the corporation has got their compensation. So this residual, that is what, in other words, are called profit or losses. The equity do not have a fixed compensation tied to its contract. compared to, for example, debt that have a fixed compensation in terms of interest. It cannot claim to receive a compensation when there is no money left after all the others have got their compensation. This contrasts with debt, for example, bank loans that have a fixed compensation, termed interest, that it has the right to receive. Managers cannot do what it can do to the equity owner. Say, sorry, there is no money left. You have to wait for the next year to see if you can get compensated. That a manager cannot tell the bank where they have a loan, but they can tell the owners. So that's why we say that when it concerns debt, interest never sleeps. It's always active. But when equity concerns, that could go to sleep because they have no right to get the compensation. Interest always keep up pressure for performance. Pay or get bust is the principle of debt. The equity capital is much more forgiving, waiting for the good years to come. With this forgiving attitude, managers... With this forgiving attitude, managers could prefer more equity, hoping that the equity will be more forgiving or even asleep. But there is a balance, since while the debt can dissolve the corporation through bankruptcy, equity have the power to make the manager unemployed. In both cases, the manager is at risk. But in this case of debt, even the corporation is at risk. Sorry. While debt can dissolve the corporation for bankruptcy, as I said, equity have the power to make the manager unemployed. In both cases, the manager is at risk. But in the case of debt, even the corporation is at risk because it can be dissolved. So a manager with duty towards the corporation would prefer equity and not debt. On the other hand, equity is not interested in over-investing in a corporation because then more of its money runs the risk of being lost in case of bankruptcy. Investors are assumed to diversify their risk through investments in several corporations, but managers can argue that higher levels of equity imply better possibilities for us to make a good and fast deal, to being able to quickly catch a good business opportunity. This means that higher levels of equity increase the corporate manager's discretion, which is highly valued by managers. So a manager would try to get more equity. This is also an argument for the corporation to have high levels of free cash flow. That is cash flow that is not bound to be used for paying the bills of the corporation. The free cash flow can be used in order to perform quick acquisitions or investments without the need to have negotiations with bank or to sell shares of the corporation in order to get the necessary money. So free cash flow, as large proportion of our equity, increase the discretion of managers. While equity is owned by shareholders, they are organized if the corporation has listed shares at the stock market. This market put up demands on the corporation to supply information. So shareholders, actual and potential, can make informed decisions about investing, keeping or disinvesting in the corporation. Around the stock market, there are also parties supporting the function of the stock market. There are analysts that collect and analyze information from the corporation and about the corporation and create their product, a recommendation of buying, selling, or keeping a share. Corporate managers have an interest, but also a responsibility to deal with investors at the stock market and the analysts. That is performed through indirect action when the corporation distributes information, or through direct action when a manager has meeting with major investors and analysts. This is what constitutes interactive governance. That is an important concept, interactive governance. Interactive governance is when there is an interaction in governance from the principal to the agent, from the agent to the principal, where corporate managers try to influence, or rather, to manage the governance agents. Here, corporate managers influence through giving information to governance agents. This information is, of course, not an objective presentation as it could have been made by a professor in corporate governance, for example, by me. No, this presentation is made by a person that has a personal and organizational interest in creating a positive impression of the corporation. Those that receive the information know, of course, that the information is filtered through and influenced by this double interest. That is why I've wrote down here on the slide that the information is given in order to frame the governance agents, to make them think about the organization in a specific way that is promotional for the corporation. So interactive governance means that while the governance mechanisms are present in order to direct the managers, or one could say to frame the agents, the managers, on the other hand, are also engaged in framing the governance agents through influencing them through the information given. This is an interaction of framing where both parties try to influence the other party. One could say that while the governance actors frame the agents through governance, the corporate managers manage the governance actors through information framing. Then let's see if, to manage reports. One of the major information channels managed by the managers are the financial reports given each quarter and the yearly annual report. It gains higher legitimacy of information accuracy since they, at least the annual report, is inspected by auditors. Of course, even here, the managers have an interest of framing. Thus, information is given within the limitations of the accounting regulations and by the consent by the auditors to support the interest of the managers. The accounting regulation that concerns listed corporations in Europe, that is the IFRS regulation, is intended to give a fair and true representation of the business of the corporation in financial terms, which will support investors' decision-making. But since accounting contains valuations in order to settle the cost and revenues of the corporation, there are discretion in the creation of the accounting information. This discretion can be used by managers in order to create information that is supportive for the managers and for the organization, the corporation. However, one has to realize that this discretion is not always used in order to create an image of green forest and gold. No, negative information is also important to supply since it can shape preferable expectation and it gives an impression of credibility. Thus, to hand out some negative views could build trust, but of course, managed negative news. The activity of influencing the information given by the accounting system is termed earnings management. So it's recognized as being part of corporate management. Earnings management performed in a correct way is, as I have stressed, used within the limits of the accounting regulation and inspected by the auditor. So earnings management is a legal action. Indeed, it is an action that is performed by manager in order to support the corporation, but as studies also have found, also to support the managers. There is one specific action I can give as an example of a clear action of earnings management, and that is what's called big bath. When a new CEO is recruited, corporations tend to have lower profit when the CEO arrives, but the next year they tend to have a profit that is a little bit higher. While that can be due to good performance of the new incoming CEO, it is also partly due to earnings management, where write-offs and depreciations are used to lower the profit when the CEO is arriving, and then the next year make a different valuation in order to increase the profit. This is positive for the CEO because it indicates that the CEO is a very capable person that can handle and manage the corporation. The profit increase creates trust and power within the organization because everyone sees that the CEO is capable. It also creates trust externally, since increase in profit indicates that the manager have been able to improve the performance of the corporation. Big Bath is, however, somewhat strange, since in an efficient market, Big Bath would have no effect, since the market will understand the earnings management and will not let these management activities around accounting values influence the value of the share of the market. But Big Bath exists. And one reason could be that everyone performs Big Bath, which implies that if a corporation do not perform a Big Bath, that will create a very strongly negative signal, since it goes against the expectations. Big Bath is also used when corporations has losses. Through earnings management, the losses are increased, since more losses are still losses. If you have -1 euro, or if you have minus 100,000 euros, well, that doesn't make a big difference because it's still minus. That is why you hardly ever see a corporation doing a loss of 1 euro. No. If there are losses, then they tend to increase the losses. If the numbers are in red, that is reported losses, the color will not change if the red number increases. That is, if the losses increase. So as a summary, earnings management, for example, Big Bath, are method used by management in order to gain power and respect, both internally and externally. That is one method of managing the governance. Now, look at the equity when it concerns the ownership structure. Managers are subject to the ownership structure, but it's also true that the ownership structure is subject to the manager's actions. That is what is termed the client effect. That means that the corporation organizes itself and presents itself and therefore attract a specific kind of owners. Owners with high demand for yearly dividends are attracted to corporations with highly yearly yield. If there is no yield, those owners will not invest in those corporations. The client effect from the corporate management perspective means to find out what kind of owners that could be the most advantage stock owner for the managers and maybe also for the corporation. The question is what these advantageous owners prefer, and the answers will then guide the management in order to dress the corporation so it attracts these kind of special owners. Indeed, there is a catwalk for the corporations where they show how preferably they are. I have made a paper guided by Julia Ponomareva, originally from Kaliningrad, that found that some corporations had a preference to conform to the global good governance norms, but at the cost of higher board director compensation. So they dress the corporation with through the board having foreign directors, female directors, independent directors, knowing that that will attract a specific kind of investors. The stock market presents a specific threat towards company managers. This is the takeover market, as I told you in the first lecture, where potential shareholders can start buying shares and gaining so much voting power that they can influence the board and thereby influence the CEO and the top management team and ultimately fire the CEO. The takeover market is therefore a threat to the security of the CEO and the top management team. This induces the agents to put up fences against the takeover market, for example, to create poison pills, which are contractual conditions that makes it very costly to fire the CEO. Then we come back to interactive governance, concept I like because you can manage through interactive governance. As a corporate management, you have strong incentives to become good friends with your owners, because after all, they have some power. This is the more personal part of the interactive governance, where there is a more personal interaction between main governance persons and management persons. It constitutes an effort from management to get into the clique of the owners. It can happen that dominant owners could be families, a single corporation or an investment fund, or a small group of investors, which constitute what is termed the dominant coalition. It is advantageous for management to become part of this dominant coalition. But it has to be mentioned that it is also advantageous for the investors to include some from the management into the dominant coalition, where you can then get an interactive governance. If included in this clique, the dominant coalition, then the manager can influence the owners through personal discussions, through dinner meetings, through phone calls, and hunting sessions. This personal interaction between owners and CEOs and top management team is the height of their interactive governance, since the personal relationships imply that these actors are trying to create conditions of what's called brotherhood, that is relationships or client transactions. That is a relationship where there's a high level of trust, where people can act independently because they trust each other. This occurs when there is a group of individuals that have this high level of trust towards each other and therefore can act with these high levels of independence, thus fulfilling the manager's interest of discretion. Another method included in interactive governance from the manager's side is to have a system of governance intelligence. By this is implied to establish information channels where the corporate managers can get information about what owners are saying and communicating at different arenas, and thereby getting an understanding of the owner's thoughts and ideas. Governance intelligence could be to have contact with the individuals that are close to the clique of the owners, if the managers are not themselves in the clique. It implies to be able to identify those that are advisors, the consiglieres of the owners, and even to get in contact with them. By knowing about the mindset of the owners' consiglieres, the managers can get an understanding of the mindset of the owner. It also implies to have coverage of mass media that could report about the owner's actions in all respects and to be present at occasions where the owners tend to show up. So interactive governance, including governance intelligence, have the ultimate intent to be able to understand how the owners are thinking and even what their plans are in order to be able to be proactive, that is, to make management actions before the owners act, and thereby influence the preconditions of the owners' possible actions. So this is about half of the lecture 2. I will now need to get some water, so I stop the video here, and there will be a video number 2 that continues. Thank you very much.